Merci beaucoup. Good morning. I think it's interesting that in just a few weeks, Paris is hosting the Olympics, but today it's the Olympics of design, right? Thank you. I am fascinated by creativity and how it's just built into the human spirit, and who we are and what we want to do. And lots of people in here do different types of things, whether you're a designer, coder, maybe you're a marketer, you work somewhere in that creative process. And it's something that we do to earn money, to take care of our family, but it's also, I think work is beyond just a thing that we do to make money. It's also a thing for our spirit, to feel that we're part of a bigger system, that we're part of the human experience. And I think that if we boiled that down, it's creativity. So we have this compulsion to create. And that's something that I've always had since I was little. In fact, this is me when I was in 5th grade. I was 11 years old. I was a slightly strange kid. I was very into drawing and painting. I used to wear knit ties and button-up shirts to school. Nobody else dressed like that. Why did I do that? I don't know. But the one thing I knew was I sort of saw myself and the world a little differently than other people. And I grew up in a place that looks like this, in Iowa, which is right in the middle of the United States. Rolling hills, lots and lots of cornfields. It's mostly farmland. My grandfather was a farmer. My mother grew up in a tiny little town. And everything there is very practical. And I knew that as a kid. It was an instinct that everything was practical, functional. The landscape was beautiful, but the way that people behaved and lived their life was only functional. And I often thought, this is kind of ugly. Sometimes, like the way that people design their houses and their spaces and live their lives, it doesn't feel as creative as I wanted it to be. So I felt a little bit like a fish out of water. When I went to college at the University of Iowa, I studied painting and drawing because, again, I was obsessed with creativity and I wanted to make things every day. I wanted to get up and make things. And I remember that moment, the first moment when I would wake up in the morning early, and the first thought that went through my mind was remembering the painting that I was working on the night before and how excited, like how lit up that made me feel. And I just wanted to get back to my studio to make more things and be part of creativity in every moment of my life. And in graduate school, still studying painting and drawing, because again, obsessed with creativity, I met this beautiful woman who's my wife, Jamie Vavidich. And when I went over to her apartment for the first time, I was struck by how beautiful the space was. Color, texture, just smart, the way that things were organized. It was very functional, which is what I grew up with. But she saw life in a different way, a creative life. And then I had this realization that creativity is not just a thing in my studio. It's not just a thing in my sketchbook. It's a decision that I can make every day of my life. I can choose to be creative in my relationships, in how I host people and have parties, how I travel and visit the world, which is why I love coming to a place like Paris, which has been the center of creativity for such a long time. So meeting Jamie, I knew I wanted a creative life, and that is what we have built together. We have built a creative life that every day when I wake up, I love the space that I'm in, I love the things that I get to do, and I love that I get to live this creative life. As part of that, I have figured out a little system for myself, which is to investigate creativity. I've been involved in UX design and lots of creative pursuits for many years. And now at this point in my life, I'm about half a century in. I want to investigate how other people are being creative and the creative choices that they're taking. So I started a podcast with my friend Eli Woolery called Design Better. It started out as a podcast that was about product design, software, and so forth. We took it independent last year, in January of 2023. And so it's just Eli and me building this business around a podcast that is centered around the idea of investigating the creative process at the intersection of design and technology. And we talked to some interesting folks. We talked to people like David Sedaris, who's a writer. So funny, he's hilarious. He has a very specific process that he follows for creating new things. He writes small little things in his notebook, and he turns those into essays, and then he performs those on stage. He gets feedback, and then he edits and edits 50 times before his editor sees his work. That's a prototyping process that I think we could learn from. We talked to Ed Catmull, who's the founder of Pixar, and we'll be hearing from him here in just a minute. Pixar is famously one of the most creative businesses on the planet. Ed Catmull worked with Steve Jobs for longer than anybody else. He collaborated with him for 35 years. He worked with George Lucas on Star Wars and many other films. We've talked to people like Paola Antonelli, who's the curator at MoMA of art and design, and she understands this timeline, this broader view of creativity through the centuries, and so many other people. I want to share with you what we have learned by talking to these different types of people. And I want to share that with you in their voice. So you're going to be hearing from many of these people in just a minute. But before we dive into that, one thing I want to share with you is that what I've observed about software designers, people in UX, we often are very navel-gazy. We look at our industry. How do other people in our industry solve problems? But if we zoomed out for a minute, we are just a speck in design history. Humans have been designing for thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And it turns out we've been solving the same types of problems over and over and over again. So why don't we look to adjacent spaces? Musicians, artists, writers, animators, people who are doing different types of things. It seems unrelated, but in reality, it's all the same stuff. It's all about creativity. Sound good? Okay, let's dive in. The first thing I want to talk to you about is taste. Taste is something that I have for many years sort of, this raises the hackles on my neck. I don't really like this term because it suggests that some people have it and some people don't. And there's some truth to that. I think some of us are born with a certain sensitivity. We're very neurodiverse. Our brains work in different ways. And some of us are very sensitive to very specific details. And that probably, many people of you in this room probably are like that. That's how you were born. That's how you see the world. And it's just who you are, and you can't help it. And if you channel that in the right direction, that can help you become a better designer, a better creative thinker. We talked to the cinematographer from who did Wakanda Forever, and also she filmed Loki, this Marvel series that's on Disney+. Has anyone seen Wakanda Forever, this number 2? It was beautiful. The first movie was great. The second movie, I was just impressed by how beautiful all these shots were. And Autumn Durald Arkapaw she's the cinematographer. It was shot in Georgia, in my home state, in the United States. And the first thing that she talked to us about was taste. Here's what she had to say.
Something I always talk about is taste. The level of taste at which you bring to the table. And if you're lucky, you have a team that has that same level of taste. Because that's really, for me, the most important thing is like, how good is your taste in lighting? How good is your taste in costume? How good is your taste in design?
What do you think she means? How good is your taste in lighting? Anybody have an idea? What do you think she's referring to? Skills, okay. So how well you can use a camera, that's probably a mechanics thing. Anybody else? Yeah. How sharp is your eye? Okay. Yeah. One more. Culture. Okay, so your awareness of culture. I think ultimately what she's talking about here is sensitivity, is how sensitive you are to all the different options. Which lens might you choose? How might you set up the lighting? Well, there are 1,000 upon 1,000, exponentially a high number of options that you could choose. But you have to choose something, and there is something that is more right and less right. We operate in the creative space in that spectrum. And sensitivity is about exposing yourself to many different things and having the awareness of the options at hand and which one is the most appropriate for that moment. And which one, maybe, like using judgment, which one is better? Has anyone seen this movie, Jiro Dreams of Sushi? It's a documentary. Anyone? Yeah? We had the directors of this film on the podcast a while back. I love this film, and it is literally, not just metaphorically, but literally about taste, the taste of sushi. Jiro Ono is still alive. He's in his 90s, still making sushi, and he had this great passage in the movie where he talked about taste. He said, in order to make delicious food, you must eat delicious food. The quality of ingredients is important, but you need to develop a palate capable of discerning good and bad. Without good taste, you can't make good food. If your sense of taste is lower than that of your customers, how will you impress them? That, to me, is the definition of taste right there. So it seems elusive, it seems very exclusive, that some people have it and some people don't. You're either born with it or you don't have it. That's not true in my judgment. Taste is cultivated. Taste is something we cultivated through sensitivity and exposure. In fact, it kind of boils down to this. Experiences, that you have many, many experiences. You're very precise about how you notice the details of those experiences. And then at a certain point, once you've built a vocabulary, a creative vocabulary, you have the restraint to choose when to use something and when not. Because when you build that vocabulary, you could throw everything out on the page, all the words, but which ones are the right words? And I think that this topic is one that we need to dig into more right now, because right now, our creative space, our work, our livelihood is being transformed by artificial intelligence. And I was just in San Francisco a couple weeks ago with Adobe, hosting a conversation with some of their leaders who are working on their artificial intelligence products like Firefly. And I was fascinated how Adobe was thinking about this. Talked to Daniela Morimoto. She's a senior design manager on the Firefly team. And she said that she said, we were talking to an illustrator who has a lot of client work freelancing. And he said that as generative AI was becoming more prevalent, clients were now coming to him with generated images to show, this is kind of what I want. So his clients come to him, he's an illustrator, and they're coming with AI-generated illustrations saying, like, we want something like this. But they still need him to make that come to life. As creatives, that skill set of curation and taste are still things that you need and are really powerful. So your taste, it's always been important, but it's more important now when people could go to an AI tool, a generative AI tool to make something. What separates us as creative professionals from the robots? Well, experiences and judgment. That's what separates us. And those things are the building blocks of taste. So it's a really important thing for us to be cultivating now. So to that point of experiences, one thing that I find fascinating is that So many creative people don't really have an understanding of history and how things fit together. I love to read history books, not just like design or art history books, but just history in general, because it tells you about the human experience and it shows you patterns. There are patterns. We think these are different times. Yes and no. We've gone through revolutions in the past. We've seen political upheaval. Much of what we experience today, there's echoes of that in the past. Is anyone familiar with Jonathan Adler? He's a designer. He started out as a ceramicist making pottery, and now he's built kind of an empire for himself for interior design, and he sells a lot of products, beautiful, beautiful products, lots of color, lots of texture, lots of art history in everything he's doing. This is a photo of a space that he designed at a hotel in Palm Springs, a really beautiful Palm Springs mid-century modern hotel in California. And if you look at this and sort of pay attention, if you have some awareness of art history, you start to see some of those references that are built into his work. So, for example, Rene Magritte's pipe. This is not a pipe. Look at the bar cart on here. It's from Rene Magritte's pipe. Very clever. If you caught it, great. If you didn't, that's okay too. It's still a beautiful, interesting object. And Andy Warhol references here with the lips, some of the prints. You can see those going up the stairs. There's Salvador Dali. There's many others. And in fact, so here's another space of his. And so this is, these couches, the rugs, the pottery, basically everything you see here, he is designing these products and selling them online and in his showrooms around the world. And clearly, he knows a lot about this style. This is not one of his. This is a room from the 1960s in the Hollywood Regency style, inspired by LA, kind of glamorous movie life and so forth. Look at the materials, look at the color, look at the texture. Jonathan Adler is so paying attention to all of that stuff. And he's bringing all of that into his work. So when you have that deep vocabulary of history, you've got more taste, you've got more to draw from that creates many more creative possibilities. Here's Jonathan from a conversation that we had with him. See if the audio will play here.
I'm sure, there are elements of the design world, it's such a broad thing, but like I make groovy stuff that I hope people's heirs will fight over in the future. That is my goal as a designer. And in order to do that, I feel like it's very important to have a very broad understanding of design history. And whilst I don't teach a class in design history to my operatives, I make a lot of references that I think they end up learning, understanding, and I think they probably, I've had people who've worked with me forever come away from their experience with just a much, much broader knowledge of design history than they ever would have gotten in design school, which is sad, in my opinion.
So he's hiring designers fresh out of college, and they don't really have a lot of design history knowledge. It's somewhat ironic. So he's bringing that to his new hires, his interns and designers, which I think is fantastic. Also had a conversation with a professor from Stanford named Barry Cates, and he's been studying design for a long time, and he teaches a course and wrote a book on the history of design in Silicon Valley. This was really fascinating to me because many of the challenges that we all face in teams, at large companies and so forth, they echo the way that design integrated into technology back in the 50s and 60s. So here's Barry, and he's talking about history here, and then I'll give you an example of something he shared with us.
My own feeling is that if we step back from where we are, we will have a context and a perspective that will clarify the route in front of us. that's what I've been trying to accomplish in the books that you mentioned and the teaching that I've done at Stanford and California College of the Arts. It's to encourage people, encourage students, encourage people in professional practice to step back from the intensity of the moment and gain a larger perspective. In doing so, you will find all kinds of interesting things, one of which is simply the fact that much of what you were doing that feels so completely new, unprecedented, and state-of-the-art actually has precedence and has some instructive lessons about what has happened that has gone right and what has happened that has gone wrong, and then may, as I say, give us some kind of guidance as we move forward.
I want you to raise your hand if you've ever worked with product or engineering or executives. You're a designer, and you've had trouble working with them because they don't understand the value of design. Gee, that's everybody in the room. This is the first calculator, pocket calculator. Guess what happened with this? So Hewlett-Packard was making scientific instruments for engineers. And there were no human factors, there was no user experience. In fact, designers were never part of the conversation until they started to make a product for mere mortals, people like us, who needed to do math, in their daily lives, at school, at work, etc., at home. And so they started to sell B2C, business to consumer. And guess what happened? This is the 1960s, mid-1960s. They had to bring designers into the process because it wasn't engineers creating products for engineers. It was engineers and designers creating products for lots of different types of people for lots of different types of situations. And guess what it was like in Hewlett-Packard as a designer working with engineers? It was the exact same as it is today. Engineers didn't understand designers. Designers were advocating for the user, and this is the way people want to use it. So from the moment that design was integrated into technology in the 60s, the same relationship has been there that you're dealing with today. I think that's kind of interesting, and also it makes me feel like, okay, it's not me. It's just this is the space that we're operating in. We're all dealing with the same thing. And it's nice to know a bit of history and how that came together. Barry Cates is full of stories like that. The moment when interaction design as a phrase was coined, he remembers that exact moment. He was there. It's very interesting. So constraints are something in the creative disciplines that we often reference and talk about. They're very valuable to us. They are sometimes very frustrating. We have to, create a thing within 30 days to ship it, or we can only do these small changes within this period of time. We're confronted with constraints all the time, and they can be really limiting, but they can also be very clarifying for us as well. Another person from Stanford, we have a lot of Stanford folks because my colleague Eli Woolery, who co-hosts the podcast with me, he teaches at Stanford, so we have a connection there. Tina Seelig, who runs a big department there, and sees a lot about the creative process. She talked to us a little bit about constraints in the creative
constraints
process.
are one of the most powerful stimulants of creativity. And if you don't have the constraints, you often don't have that engine to push you forward. I think it's really important to keep that in mind, is that oftentimes when you look at companies that have way too many resources, they make bad decisions. The constraints force you to do the right thing.
I've seen what she just described. Companies that don't have constraints, maybe they've got too much money, too much time, too much runway, too many people, and they make bad decisions. Versus being in a company where there's a lot of constraints, it forces you to focus on fewer things and put all your energy into those things. So constraints are valuable. And that was something that Charles and Ray Eames knew very well. Are you familiar with Charles and Ray? Yeah. We all interact with the things that they've designed. I'm so lucky. I have a friend who is moving, and she collects beautiful old things, and she was selling an original Eames lounge chair, and I saw she was moving, and I said, hey, could I come over and before you have your moving sale? And she sold me one from the 60s, which is really cool. You've probably seen this type of furniture before. It's in many airports. I don't think they have it in Charles de Gaulle, but travel the world, you're bound to encounter this seating. This was designed by Charles and Ray Eames. They got this project, and the first thing that they did was go and find the constraints. Their question was, when they got the brief, why do you need new airport furniture? What are the constraints you're operating within? Well, everything was very fixed. They were all hooked together. So if you had a chair break, you basically had to scrap the entire row of chairs. And then where do you put that? Well, you've got to have storage space for that. So it became very expensive to repair, very expensive to store things. So that was one of the key issues. They heard that, and then they went to the airports, various airports, and started to talk to the maintenance crews and said, tell me how you do this. How long does it take to fix something? They said it takes way too long. So it takes multiple people to do this, to move it, and so forth. So Charles and Ray designed a modular system. All you've got here is like a metal side. You can see the side of the chair here, which hooks to 2 pieces of leather. And with 1 screwdriver and a couple screws, you could take out to expand or collapse something. And you can store an entire row within a very small piece of space because it all collapses down. And this is still around. I mean, these are still being used today, and they're like 60, 70 years old. And they're beautiful still. So constraints, they were so good at operating within their constraints. Eli and I got to talk to their granddaughter, Lisa Demetrios, which was very cool because to me, Charles and Ray Eames are my superheroes. I so admire everything that they've done and their process and how they played together and designed great things. Lisa grew up with them. So like as a kid, she was just playing with Charles and Ray and like in the studio and in their house and so forth. She's in a lot of their movies, the films that they made. And here's what she said about their work process.
When they designed the airport tandem seating, they said you talk to the person who's going to buy your chair, but also the person who's going to take care of your chair. And they wanted to know what was wrong with the existing airport seating. Why did they need to design airport seating? And so they talked to the maintenance teams across the country. And what they found was it was the replacement parts. The back and seat were 2 different shapes, heavily upholstered, took 2 people to take it out, took up a lot of storage. And if you look at the airport tandem seating, the back and the seat are the same form. It rolls up into a little tube. It takes 1 person and 1 screwdriver to pop it out and put the new one in. And so we can show that iteration of how they figured out and how to solve the problems.
I think that's a pretty amazing design example there to great success. Another thing that is very valuable in the creative process is boundaries in what we're doing and how we collaborate as well. This is a phrase that I heard often in graduate school from my painting professors. So you have to know how to protect your work. When is it in the early phases where you don't want to bring in a lot of judgment because people will tear it apart, derail your process, your thought process, and so forth. So being able to protect your work at just the right time is an important thing. And sometimes, boundaries are set by the amount of time that we have and how much attention we can put into that work. Our attention increasingly is becoming one of the biggest boundaries in creativity. We're often lost in our phones, we're lost in just like paying attention to stuff. Might not be important stuff, and you really have to be like a mindful person to not get lost in Instagram or TikTok. We got to talk to John Cleese. We caught him in Mauritius. He was on vacation with his wife, writing a screenplay. He's such a wild dude. He did a lot of interesting stuff with Monty Python, and that creative process If you're a Monty Python fan, you know that those guys often fought. There was a lot of contention in how they interacted. And John Cleese told us that people need to realize how incredibly destructive interruptions are if you're trying to be creative. You need to create boundaries of space and time within which you can play. You need to create an oasis of quiet where you can focus without distractions. That was actually why he was in Mauritius, was he sort of was going to a retreat where he could focus. But this is the thing that kills me about the way that we are often kind of forced to work in our jobs. It's with constant interruptions. These open spaces, open seating plans that are said to be like super creative, they're actually really bad for creativity because you have other people coming in and interjecting in creativity in the creative process, and that can just slow us down and derail us. If you think about, like, you know, it drives me crazy. I love that I work from home and my wife can stop in and tell me something, or my kids can swing by. But if they catch me at the wrong time, it's very expensive because it takes me a long time to get back into the thing that I was doing. And those transitions, we have to be mindful of that and protect it. So if you and your team have to do something very important, work on a new design concept, work on a new plan for what you're going to do in the coming year, you need to create a protected space where you cannot be interrupted, where you can just focus and get away. And that's why retreats are such an important thing for people. David Sedaris, just curious, is David Sedaris very popular over here? I feel like he's lived in France for some time. No? No? Okay, curious. If you haven't read anything of his or listened to anything of his, so good. Very dry, cutting sense of humor. Here's what he told us about constraints and boundaries.
You don't stay off the phone. I mean, I can't remember the last time I rode an elevator and the person or persons with me weren't on the phone. You know, I don't know what they're doing. Or, you know, people get on an escalator and then they decide that's a good time to pull out their phones. I don't know. I just never, I'm on my phone. So that's part of it right there. Plus, my livelihood, right? To look for things that are striking for some reason. And if you're staring down at a phone, you're definitely not going to see anything, right? Except what's on your phone. And I understand there's a lot online, right? There's a whole world there, but you can go to that world anytime.
I thought this was super interesting because I often think of my phone and the internet as like, this is a creative place I'm going to go to. But it is mostly a place that is sort of programmatically shaping my attention. I put my attention into that, and someone else essentially curates what I'm going to see. And if we're trying to cultivate taste, and we're trying to cultivate a sense of experiences, diverse experiences, breadth of knowledge, this is a very limiting, dangerous constraint that we only see a certain type of information. I love my phone. I really do. I listen to a lot of books. I watch a lot of YouTube. Man, it is great, and I've learned a ton from it. But I also try to go on a walk without any inputs and try to create spaces where I have no inputs. That's when I have the best, most creative ideas. A lot of people say that the shower is where they have their best ideas. You know why? Because you can't look at your phone when you're in the shower. Some people do, but so creating open space for our minds, creating boundaries for your mind to do creative things is important. And of course, play, like being able to play and experiment with things. This is something that's often referenced, like we need to play more, we need to bring play into our work. Play is basically creativity without judgment. So judgment is the thing that is built into the business context. Does it help us make more money, keep more people on our website, do a thing, sell more widgets? Play is, let's do some stuff, let's pretend something. We're not trying to accomplish anything other than being in that experience. And it's a central part of the creative process. I talked about Charles and Ray Eames earlier. If you look at any of the films about them and like some of the things that they did, play was so central to everything they were doing. So judgment is an important part of the creative process, but if you bring it in early, it's sort of like pouring cement into a machine. It just stops everything. So that's why protecting your work and people coming in and giving you feedback too early, judging it, does it help us with this OKR? If that happens too early, that can be very destructive. Clarity is something a lot of us crave. We can't work without it. I remember when I was leading design at MailChimp, where I had some designers who were perfect with ambiguity, with no clarity whatsoever, and some who had to know exactly what are we doing, when does it need to be done, how many buttons should be on the page. I called them hunters and farmers. Hunters, there's no clarity. Where's the animal? I don't know. I'm just going to wander around and see what I find. Farmers, go pull the weed over and over and over. And I gave a farmer a hunter's job. I said, go explore and see what the future of MailChimp might look like if there were no constraints. I found this guy crying in the parking lot at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I said, what's going on, man? Why are you so down? How can I help? And he said, I don't know what I'm doing. I just is this good? Is that good? I don't know what I should be doing. He just he needed clarity to be able to feel good about his work. That's how some of us operate, and that's okay, but just knowing that is important. I'm an ambiguity sort of guy. I don't know, we'll see. If I get too many constraints and too much clarity, I just feel claustrophobic. Let's share this with you.
Well, the whole point about play is it's unpredictable. You see, in our culture now, what people want more than anything else is clarity. Everybody wants clarity and clarity quickly. And one of the characteristics of creative people is that they can live in confusion quite happily. They quite enjoy it. They don't feel they have to be clear about everything. And I think that's incredibly important, that you don't really know where you're going.
So John Cleese and the way that Monty Python comes together, I mean, any of those skits, this one was a skit about going into a cheese shop and they didn't have any cheese. And so John Cleese just asks over and over for every single type of cheese that you can think of. It's hilarious, but it just doesn't make any sense. It's just how do you write that down as this is going to be funny? How it makes sense is you play without any judgment, without any goals, and weird stuff comes out at the end. And that's what Monty Python's Flying Circus was always about, was just about play and ambiguity, which is why it too has such staying power. The other thing is, with play, we end up trying many, 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 many things. And this is one of the flaws I see in software design. I use Figma, and it's a great tool. Next week is Config in San Francisco. When I'm designing something, when designing a product, I can get to clarity very quickly. I can get to something very high fidelity. And you know what happens? I get very invested in that thing. And so I pitch a little bit harder to a client. Or I receive the feedback a little bit harder, like they want to change it, and that would be kind of a pain in the neck to change these things. So software design, because of our tools, means that we often don't think divergently and try many, many different things. So play is also about playing the odds, where you can try many things to find something that is absolutely unexpected, like a cheese sketch on Monty Python. This is a band called OK Go, and we had them on the show. I'll share this with you.
you're, a moderately analytical person, you already know that the chance of success of any one project is at best 10%. Probably more like 1%. Once you got a big track record, maybe it's 10%. But for rock bands, especially little rock bands who don't have anything going for them yet, it's like 1 in a million. And so you just throw everything at the wall with a lot of unearned self-confidence, and then chase the things that are working. And as they do, you look for the pattern in them, and especially if you don't trust the kind of corporate system around it, like you're likely to see the DIY pattern more than anything else. And so all of that is a long-winded way of coming back to sort of like when we had direct access to fans through the internet, when we could make something and watch people download it directly, it sure made the advice of our major label seem a lot less worth following.
Is anyone familiar with OK Go and their videos? Okay, great. Yeah, if you're not, do yourself a favor and jump on YouTube later and just search for OK Go. Their videos are impossible. They're amazing and impossible and creative and off the charts. They went to Russia a few years ago and hired these cosmonauts, former cosmonauts, to do a weightless video. They got on a vomit comet, is what it's called. It's an airplane that goes up like this and then falls out of the sky. And so you're weightless for like 20 seconds, and then you pull back up, which makes you throw up over and over again. And they shot a music video in that process. It's unbelievable. It's so beautiful. So creative collaboration, I think, is one of the things that we struggle with. And that often is the case because we have egos, that we sort of think of our ideas as the best, and we want our ideas to float to the top. Maybe there are some shy, introverted people, and it's hard to pull them out to participate. There's many reasons why creative collaboration is a challenge, but it is a challenge, especially if you're at a large company working with a lot of people. And one thing that's come out in conversations with many different types of creative people is that there are multipliers. One of the opportunities with creative collaboration is finding people that you can work with who not only make your work better, but you plus them together is a combination that is greater than the sum of the parts. They amplify, you amplify together and find something really magical. I'm going to show you an OK Go video that just demonstrates what these multipliers are like. If you've not seen OK Go, you're in for a treat here. This is a video that they shot over a little more than a month in Japan. And there's not a lot of fancy, this is small budget stuff. They have lots of constraints, they have lots of collaborators, and they're trying to make the impossible possible.
Thanks.
Okay, I understand there's a drone. I understand there's a bunch of umbrellas. I understand there's some fancy unicycles. The rest of it, I don't understand. And this is what that is so amazing about what they do. And they do it over and over and over and over again. Almost all of their videos are like this. They're so impossible. And along the way, I think that, as the viewer, I'm pulling for them. Like, how are they going to pull this off? And they specifically have, they judge their work based on how many surprising, magical moments are present here. So the multipliers, who they choose to collaborate with, it's really important. One of my closest friends is a director, and he shot a video with them. And it's sort of simple in its concept, and yet the output was impossible. So here's Damien. We had Damien and Tim, who founded the band, on the show. And here they are talking about their work.
The 1 + 1 = more than 2 factor, that's kind of what all collaboration really should feel like, right? Like, when a collaboration works, it feels like cheating to everybody involved. I came in with a really good idea, and I'm leaving with an even better one. If there's a lot of sort of territorialism over credit, that can't work. But if it's sort of like, what we want is this amazing thing, and everybody who's involved with this amazing thing is part of this amazing thing, then it's very additive, and everybody who puts something into it gets the total out of it.
So what I think is key here is we have to let go of our ego to a certain degree. Our ego brings some confidence that he talked about, this creative confidence. I'm going to try this out. And then we also have to let go and let other people have space to bring their ego and their skills to bear as well. Now, complexity, we just saw an incredible example of complexity. And complexity is built into pretty much all of the teams that we're working in. Because when we get lots of humans together to make something big, there's complexity in the problem we're solving, but there's complexity in the organizational structure and just the interactions between humans. We talked to Hiroki Asai. He was at Apple and led marketing through the launch of the iPhone, iPad, all the big stuff. And now he's global head of marketing and design at Airbnb. And he talked a lot about organizational structure. As a former Apple person, how that was so key to doing your best work. He said if you have a simple organization, it creates adjacency. We have our research and insights team literally sitting right with our leads of the advertising group. The least amount of translation that you have between customer-facing teams and your design teams, the better the work, the simpler the work. It's just so much more of a joyful process. And I totally agree with that. In most companies, the idea is over here, and then that has to be translated over to a team who's going to make something, and so much gets lost in translation. What he's talking about is bringing that close together, and really the spirit of Agile, the Agile methodology, this is a core concept of that, but I rarely see Agile done well inside of companies where it honors the original concepts of Agile. Leadership is another important part of collaboration, and knowing when to lead and knowing when to let others kind of run with things. What we've seen as a pattern in lots of design leaders or just leaders in general that we've talked to, they all have this in common. They keep an open mind about the solution instead of saying, directive, kind of dictatorial, this is how we solve it. They have an open mind. They actively try to balance voices out so many people are heard. And they ask questions instead of disagreeing all the time. So tell me more about that. Say more about that. How would we do that? And that was something that John Cleese talked to us about a lot. The person in charge has got to understand the process. They've got to be open to learning and not have some idea that they've got to get them all to agree to, because creative people spot that in a moment. that makes them very angry. And he learned that the hard way in Monty Python's in the 60s, that he would come in with an idea that he wanted the troupe to kind of go towards, and they would get so upset with him. And he realized he just has to like be part of it, but also let other people speak up and bring their own ideas to the table. You have to be open and quiet down the most dominant people. This happens a lot in meetings, like, dudes, this is often us, men who are like speaking up more and speaking over other people instead of letting all the voices be heard. You have to be able to shut them up and to encourage the shyer people, get the more introverted people to speak up, and you have to keep that balance going. A good rule in a group is never criticize someone, only ask a question. If you disagree with something, you say, well, what do you mean by that? What have you got in your mind? I discovered with Terry Jones, who is a member of Monty Python's, I very frequently disagreed with Terry, but I then decided if I asked him what he was talking about, I'd then see what he was getting at. We often misconstrue. We think we understand what people are saying, but we sort of miss their point. So just asking clarifying questions brings us together and keeps the creativity flowing. Ed Catmull, I mentioned earlier, who co-founded Pixar, he wrote a great book. If you haven't read this book, it's so wonderful. Creativity, Inc., Overcoming the Unseen Forces That Stand in the Way of True Inspiration. This is sort of like the recipe and what we learned at Pixar about being creative and running creative teams. Fantastic book. He came on the show to talk about the latest edition, which is updated and expanded. And he shared this story with us that I found really interesting. He didn't say this exactly, but the most dangerous word in creative collaboration is me. Me. What part of this is me? And that is often because we're trying to be the one who claims the spotlight, be the one who is creating the idea. Boy, when I was a younger man working in creative teams, I struggled with this. This was very challenging for me because I come from an art background, and art is all about me. It's not about we. Design is about a process and all of us working together. So I'm going to share a little passage of what Ed talked to us about on the show.
It seems like you were always operating in service of others and the creative idea into something bigger. I don't know, it just strikes me as very fulfilling and meaningful.
Yes, why are we doing anything? Are we doing it because we're working with people and to me, like we're connected with them? It was actually something I meant to put in the first version of it, but it got dropped out. But I did add on this one, but it was because I did ask this question, and which I recognized at the time was kind of a selfish question, which is right after Toy Story came out, was how much of it was me. And I thought about it for a while, and I knew completely well that all these other people were part of making this happen. So it was John Lasseter and Andrew and Pete Docter and Lee and Steve and George, and a lot of people who were absolutely critical, but other people we wouldn't even know about. So there's no point in saying their names because nobody knows them, but they were all part of this, and I knew that. But I still have this question always, okay, well, yeah, I get that, but how much of it was me? And at the end of the year, I realized, actually, trying to answer that question is an act of separation. And that isn't what happened. There is no separation. There is no line. The notion that I could say that the part that's me is actually not the right path to go down. I know why it comes up with people, and I know some people actually want to feel compelled to answer it. And for me, the realization is trying to answer that leads you down a bad path. That we really are doing this together. And if we do this well, then it's very fulfilling, it's emotionally fulfilling, and it makes a difference.
Ed got choked up when he was talking about this because I asked him what he was most proud of. I mean, Oscars, Emmys, the guy is a giant. And he said that what he was most proud of was the relationships that he built through his career and through his company. I think that's also very clarifying about creativity and why we are creative. There's this connectedness that is inherent in being creative. I think why we create is to be a participant in the world, to be a participant in the human experience. And all these people that we've talked to, I think that's a thing that's just like a common thread. Some are artists, some are writers, some are musicians, some are CEOs, lots of different backgrounds, but they all want to be part of a creative human experience. I think creativity is an act of generous connection. It's a generous gift to the world. It's an attempt to reach beyond the confines of your human body and let your spirit be in the world. I think of creativity as a spiritual act. And just as I felt that when I woke up in the morning as a young man studying painting, and the first thing I thought of was what I created, that was like my church. Like my spirit was lit up at that moment. I think creativity is a spiritual act. That is the pursuit that we're all after here. It's a search for something better, to create a better world, to create a better experience for other people. And that is why Eli and I are creating Design Better. It's a podcast, but it's also becoming a whole lot more. We have these monthly conversations, AMAs, Ask Me Anything, with amazing people. And if this is interesting to you, we'd love for you to tune in and listen and be part of our community. Thank you all.